Hello, thanks for being in a new video. This time I have full review of the Nubia Neo 2. Let's get started. This is a dedicated device for gamers, but in a segment that seeks to be very competitive in its price. Why do I say it is dedicated to gamers? Because it comes with touch triggers that you normally only find in much more expensive devices that are also focused on gaming. But it wasn't something that we could find so easily on a mid-range or low-end device. That is why it is so attractive. Its launch price in Mexico with Telcel has been 5,499 pesos, that is around $300. Although remember that the prices here are not the same as over there. In Mexico, taxes are included, and if it is distributed by Telcel, you can be sure that it will be much more expensive. So, in fact, you can find it also with unofficial sellers in Mercado Libre or Amazon at a price of 3,899 pesos, approximately $215. So, at Telcel's price, I consider it to be a more or less interesting proposal. But at the Mercado Libre or Amazon price, it is a much more attractive proposition. So join me to know it point by point. Let's try to have in mind an intermediate price between the Telcel price and the Mercado Libre price. The front design is simple. We notice bezels is much more marked, especially at the bottom, but overall it doesn't feel like an outdated device or anything. What I would love would be to see a higher level of resistance, because in this case we are not offered Gorilla Glass protection. On the right side, we find the on-off button in a red hue, along with the touch triggers which, as you notice, have a little indication through silkscreen printing. But they are not so much felt to the touch. You can identify them, but they don't have a very important relief. So, they are simple triggers, but they are definitely going to help you have a much more advanced experience when playing. And so, easily, this is one of its strongest points. A microphone is placed on the top, while on the left side is where the SIM card tray is placed. If you buy it with Telcel, the second tray will be blocked, but the globally distributed version has 2 SIM card slots. On this side we also find the volume buttons, and in this profile view we appreciate its thickness, which is 8.5 millimeters and weighs 208 grams. On the bottom we find the USB-C port, a second microphone, and the speaker. But definitely, the design of the back cover is the most attractive in aesthetic terms, since in the purest style of gamers it has quite a few indicators, some elements that would seem to emit light, although in this case they are obviously only yellow elements. Another element that seems to be a fan or seems also a kind of eye. Overall, it is quite an attractive design for a certain audience. Although it looks like it has some perforations in some areas, in reality it is only decoration, but it definitely catches the eye. In fact, I have the silver edition, but it is also available in gray and yellow. Also, appreciate that the cameras come in an octagonal design, which also gives it a pretty nice touch of originality. The only detail here is that, again, in terms of resistance, we do not find here any level of resistance against water and dust or something similar. Although remember that we are talking about an entry-level device, so we could not demand it. The screen is 6.72 inches with 20:9 ratio. It has a resolution of 2400 by 1080 pixels, so it is full HD, offering us a good level of detail. Practically 400 pixels per inch, so we do have very sharp elements, both in images and in videos, and especially in text. This is a simple LCD screen, so from some side you will notice that the brightness decreases considerably. But if you take into account that you are going to use this device from the front to play games, I think it will still give you a good level of visualization. In fact, it is curious that it does support HDR content, although the brightness is not really very high. There is no exact information regarding the maximum peak brightness, but in this case it is a screen that when displaying HDR content, what it will do is lower the brightness of the darkest areas so that the brightest areas have the maximum brightness of the screen. But in this case it is not able to give you a very powerful brightness. That's why when viewing HDR content, the screen even looks less bright than when viewing traditional content. But notice how the screen definitely loses a lot of brightness when you view it from the side, so it doesn't have such powerful viewing angles. And regarding the minimum brightness, it's comfortable and also has an extra dimming option in the accessibility options. And as you can see, it also integrates several options that usually integrate other devices, such as dark mode, a reading mode to activate grayscale, also a night mode to have a blue light filter, and you can also calibrate differently the colors of the screen. But I insist that it is a simple screen without having the ability to represent colors so accurately, but enough to have a good fluidity playing, since it has 120 Hz in its refresh rate, and this is something that gamers will definitely like. In fact, you could even activate an option to show you in the status bar the current frequency at which the screen is. You can also adjust it manually, but ideally leave it set to automatic. So, with 120 Hz, if it is able to show you very smooth and fluid movements in the interface and of course also in some compatible games, although the processor is not so powerful as to reach 120 frames per second in many contents, but if you have a good fluidity on the screen. This device integrates two speakers, one at the bottom, which is the main speaker and will have the most presence of bass frequencies, and another speaker is in the earpiece area for calls. So if you have zero sound, and honestly I find it a very strong point. The sound is of good quality and with good power. Let's listen to a small test, although remember that it is not the same to listen to it live. In addition, through software we will find the DTS-X ultrasound options, so there are also good options in this part. For example, you can select the style of headphones you have connected. You can also access some presets of sound types and access a 10-band graphic equalizer without the need to have headphones connected, giving us a very good sound experience. In fact, you can also select the type of stereo sound that these speakers are emitting. So definitely the experience will be supreme in terms of audio, considering it is an entry series device. Although a clear disadvantage is that it has no headphone jack, and being a device for gamers, I honestly find it a waste not to put headphone jack, because no matter how advanced your wireless headphones are, they are still going to have latency. In this case, fortunately, in addition to the SBC codec and the AAC codec, they also support the LDAC codec, something that is very positive for music resolution. But latency can definitely work against you. If you were planning to play with headphones, the experience here will be a bit ruined. And regarding the microphones, it has two what is necessary to be a mid-range device, one on the bottom, one on the top. So let's listen to a test.
Esta es una prueba de audio grabada utilizando los micrófonos integrados del Nubia Neo 2 5G.
They are definitely simple microphones. It does not give to be your priority, so even the voices do not get to capture them as clearly as we would like. Then we will see a video recorded with this device in a very high volume environment to see how it behaves. See, I think the microphones still do a decent job. There doesn't seem to be very noticeable distortions, so even in some very loud concert or music scenarios, they could give you an acceptable experience. The front-facing camera is a 6-megapixel one with f2 0-point aperture and fixed focus. In this case, there is no fast aperture gesture for the camera, but directly from the lock screen. And in this case, it does not show any capture animation, and that makes it a little more agile capture. But it is quite strange that it does not show any special animation. Throughout the interface, we find a button to activate the beauty mode that only has a slider of 7 levels. We also find another button to activate the different color filters, but we can't preview them in real time. And in the settings, you can turn on the option to recognize the palm of your hand to capture the photo and even smile detection. So it may become a little easier to take selfies when the shutter is a little hard to reach. It's clear to everyone that this is not a selfie-focused device, but selfies will be acceptable if nothing else. The cameras are low in contrast and obviously low in detail, but for the price range I consider them to be good quality selfies, although there is quite a bit of grain present in the darker areas even in well-lit conditions. It is a fixed focus camera, but whether you are close or far away from the camera, I find that the level of detail will be very similar. But if you are very close to the camera, you will come out completely out of focus and also with a lot of noise. In backlit scenes, the preview still doesn't look optimized and the result is honestly quite bad. Especially since the shadow area is a bit overexposed and also the brighter areas have a rather strange color. So the front camera will definitely be simple. Although interestingly at night the result was nice, a bit warmer than I would have liked, but overall the picture doesn't look bad, it doesn't have as much detail obviously. It has a bit more grain, but it doesn't look as bad as I expected. Although note that in this night portrait it is very clear that it was not able to detect my hand and arm, then the results can become very plain in portrait photography. But for the price range we can forgive it this, also considering that it is a device that is not focused on photography. And during the day it does not struggle so much in detecting the body, but it is not able to detect objects in the foreground, so the result can come out unnatural, but the bokeh effect generated in the background is nice. However, consider that it is a simple photograph. On the back we find the camera of about bin of 7mm with 50 megapixels in its sensor and aperture f1.8, in addition to autofocus. Obviously, this is a camera that could become outstanding. In a moment we will see its results, but the second camera is much simpler. It is hardly a camera to capture depth, supposedly with 2 megapixels and aperture f2.0, plus fixed focus, so this camera is not very attractive. But being a device focused on gamers, I guess they're not that interested in photography, but in a moment we see their results. For now what I want you to see is that obviously the camera has a little bit of lag like all devices, and if you want to capture the exact moment, it's a little bit tricky because it also has a delay in capturing. So about a quarter of a second later it takes the picture. And even though it has an unlimited burst of pictures, it also gets to take more than half a second to activate. So it can become very difficult to capture the specific moment. Inside the camera there is also the beauty option with 7 levels as we saw in the front camera, and also the color filters. You can tap on screen to adjust exposure or focus, but also in the list of more modes you can enter expert mode, where you can change the compensation, shutter speed, which can go up to 0.5 seconds, focus, ISO, which can go up to 3200, white balance, and other settings like contrast and saturation. But RAW photography is not supported. And to be able to scan QR codes, it has a special mode that you have to access. Unfortunately, it is not able to do the scanning directly from the automatic mode, but it works fine. In fact, we could also access Google Lens to do this action, so there are 2 ways, but you must activate the permissions. And for scanning documents, you also have a special option in a mode so that it can detect the edges of this sheet. And you can also select from 3 different color settings. Although you can't go adding sheets or something similar, but at least before you capture it, it does allow you to select an enhanced setting so that it looks like a dedicated scanner and doesn't just look like a cropped photo. Although I honestly think I prefer the cropped photo mode. This device supposedly takes pictures at 50 megapixels, and indeed the file shows that it is 50 megapixels. But in reality the level of detail does not correspond to 50 megapixels. So, it is not a camera that gets the most out of its sensor. Note that zoomed in, it does not seem to retain a good level of detail, it still looks low. So it looks more like a 13 megapixel camera interpolated to 50 megapixels in this mode. In motion scenes, if you are in well-lit environments, you will have an acceptable result, although note that there are some areas where it seems that the device comes to battle, confirming again that this is an entry-level device. We even see a bit of overexposure in some areas of this photograph. The outdoor pictures have an acceptable result, but nothing more. Colors are not as accurate, especially if they are getting a lot of light. But for a good number of users who are not so interested in very high quality photographs, the result will be good. In this case, with respect to the zoom, it is going to give us a normal range as we see in the range of 10x maximum, but it looks very pixelated. So it doesn't seem to take advantage of the sensor information again, but it's a very simple result. Although fortunately in backlit scenarios that is not so complex, even the preview looks good. But if you have the HD turned back off, even if the preview looks good, in reality the result will come out burnt and overexposed in the brightest areas, which is rather curious. And in the evenings the device is going to give us an acceptable picture again. The colors won't be as accurate or as intense, and if you use the night mode, it's going to improve in terms of the level of detail, although the colors stay very similar. Here you're looking at another example of a photograph in a fairly dark area where there's no area of illumination, and with night mode, it improves the light pickup tremendously. But if there is a light source, night mode will also help you, as you can see that in auto mode the lighting area is very overexposed, the illuminated area is very overexposed, but with night mode you balance this area better, gain more detail, reduce noise, so it is highly recommended to use night mode in this type of photography. And even though the device doesn't have a macro camera, I find it gives good results with the main camera, focusing well on close objects. You can't get that close, so smaller objects may not be able to be captured with as much definition. But by using the Zoom 2X, you might be able to get a little more detail on these small objects, but obviously he's not an expert at this. And even though it doesn't have an ultra-wide camera, having a panorama mode helps it. Plus it's a good resolution panorama mode. So you can get a very wide and detailed picture without the need for an ultra-wide camera. And finally, in portrait photography, it gives a good result. It seems that it does get to take advantage of its depth camera because it does detect the difference between the foreground and background to blur the background. In fact, it also handles backlighting well, so the portraits honestly surprise me. They are among the best you'll find in the entry-level segment, and that is a device that is not focused on photography. This device supports full HD recording at 30 frames per second, both with the rear camera and the front camera. Something curious is that it lets you disable face detection, which will be important if you want to handle a better dynamic range. You can also enable or disable stabilization, and you can also change the white balance manually, or you can leave it in automatic mode. Interestingly, it also includes the beauty options with the same slider that we see in photography and also the same color filters applied to video. While recording, you will have the option to pause and resume your clip, but you cannot take pictures, nor can you turn on the flashlight, much less you can rotate to the front camera, and it doesn't have some quick zoom shortcuts either, it only has this slider. So the interface is pretty simple. Video recording will be simple. It seems that the focus has some complications, just like the exposure seems to be adjusting a bit more than we would like. It is not a device focused on this, but to record simple videos could pass as something positive. Colors don't seem to me to be as saturated or as accurate, but overall it doesn't feel like a disastrous video recording experience. The zoom is going with slightly smooth steps, and it does feel like it is indeed a well-used image. It doesn't simply look like a stretched image, although it does feel very noticeable as it zooms in on the horizontal and vertical axis, giving a jelly-like effect in the final adjustment. But I think that for the price and being a device that is not focused on the camera, it is fine. In light backlit scenarios, you'll notice that it is going to give priority to illuminating the face if you have the option turned on. So you might have some jumps in exposure when it detects or fails to detect the face. So the best thing to do would be to disable face detection to have a much more stable scene. The device allows us to turn stabilization on or off, so first you're looking at a clip with stabilization off, where it's generally not recommended to record unless you have a very steady base. But now you're seeing what the result looks like with stabilization enabled, and it definitely improves, but not enough to recommend this device for recording action scenes. The footsteps look a little more disguised when you're walking, but when you're running, it's definitely not enough. The focus, as I anticipated, struggles quite a bit, so in aggressive movements of small objects it won't react. With much larger objects it might help it react better, but there are still moments where the focus seems to be a bit imprecise or misadjusted. So this is definitely not a good thing on this device. The device does not integrate slow motion, and fast motion can be from 4x, which can be very useful for recording movements of people, although without stabilization. So the result is not good if you are in a lot of movement. Also, you see aggressive jumps in the exposure and other things, so it is a fast camera that does not end up being as attractive as we would like. But the fastest it can go is up to 1800x, so you could even record plant growth without any problems. Or you could also record some other landscapes and similar things, and in this case the result is much nicer if you have the device on some kind of base. In this sense, it will give us an excellent experience. And the front camera is also going to record in a straightforward way. It's also full HD resolution, so you have a level of detail appropriate to the range. Although it does not have excellent stabilization, at least it does not look like a disaster as we have seen in other devices. And in this case, it's not advisable to record with the backlit areas because they'll burn out completely, so it gives a very simple feel. and at night it will obviously appear much more noise and grainy, although it tries to still maintain a good color saturation. However, in this case, I think it's a bit overdone the warm tone of the scene, but still I think considering it's not a camera-focused device, it gives a good result recording at night as long as you have some lighting nearby. Obviously, if you go to some very dark areas, it's going to suffer too much and it's not able to illuminate the screen to try to give you more illumination to the face. And obviously, it doesn't integrate front slow motion nor fast motion, nor does it have a dual recording mode. This device integrates Android 3 and iOS 3 as operating system. A weak point without a doubt since we are currently on Android Kotlin, so it already comes outdated and also does not offer a clear policy of how many updates it will receive, so do not expect that it will have many updates in the future. The system is exactly the same as the one used by ZTE on their devices, so if you're already familiar with ZTE's software, you'll identify it here as well. We will find some themes available, but you can't download some additional themes. Something remarkable is that you could change the speed of the system animations and obviously customize the color palette and the shape of the icons, but that's something you can do on other Android devices as well. It also includes an option called Super Lock that what it will do is constantly change the wallpaper, showing you different landscapes. Fortunately, in this case, it is going to show you landscapes and not random images as in other customization layers. It also integrates a feature called Active Island that will be a kind of special animations that will show in the front camera area when you connect to charge your device or when you connect some wireless headphones. In this case, it seems to be well taken advantage of because it will also be available when you set some timer and even also while you start an audio recording or something similar. So at least it has a bit more uses unlike other simpler software we have seen. The one-handed use mode is quite curious and peculiar because it's going to allow you to select the mode you want in case you only want to reduce the vertical axis, which I personally don't find useful. But fortunately, it also allows you to switch to small window mode, which I find more useful, but it's up to you as a user, and that's a very positive thing. So far, I haven't seen an interface that allows you to choose the one-handed mode available. There is also the Z-Pop button, which can also give you more options with just a single tap, and it has the traditional gestures that we find on other devices. The one I always highlight in this system is to shake while you are inside the lock screen to allow the flashlight to turn on. In this case, curiously, it doesn't bring the floating screen option, but it does include a button in the recent apps list to load the split screen view. So definitely the operating system is quite simple. It doesn't offer too many add-ons, and in this case it comes with a Z-axis optical drive, so it's a simple vibration as well. What it does bring is something focused on games, which is the game space that we will see within the performance section. This device integrates a lateral fingerprint reader in its on-off button, allowing up to 5 registrations. In this fingerprint reader, you can also map some of your fingerprints to directly open an application when you unlock using that fingerprint. You can also choose whether you want to press the button or just tap it to perform the unlock action, and obviously it also has facial recognition but simple 2-dimensional. You will also have the option to keep the device unlocked in secure environments through Google Smart Lock. You can add trusted locations or devices. And another thing it brings from Google is the password manager to autofill some forms. Fortunately, it does do verification through your fingerprint before filling it out, so it works well. And it doesn't have a specific app lock, but it does bring an app called My Vault, where also through fingerprint or a pattern you can add apps, images, videos, files or passwords, and to access them, obviously you will have to access this My Vault section through your fingerprint. So it is a private and secure environment that can also help you. However, it doesn't have a child mode, nor does it have a private VPN or anything like that. And for fighting malware, you rely on Google Play Protect. Also, to try to find your lost device, you depend on Google, so it doesn't bring so many added options. The battery on this device is 5200 milliamps, so it's a little bit bigger battery than what we're used to, although in autonomy it's pretty much what we would expect from a 5000 milliamps. So it really doesn't seem to be that big of a battery. It seems that the processor is not that efficient in power consumption. In our battery drain test using this app in the foreground, it reached 4 hours and 14 minutes, which is a figure that is generally achieved by devices that make good use of 5 milliamp batteries, and running the drainer in the background while watching videos in the foreground, it reached almost 5 hours. However, it was constantly closing the application that was in the background. I mean, in practical life, that means it's going to have a very aggressive management of apps running in the background, so it's likely you could miss some notifications or important things from applications. So if an application is very important to you and you want to keep it always running, you need to access this section to determine that you want to allow this type of execution. And with this, you can avoid that it is constantly closing. The charger included in the box is 33 watts, and in my test with 15 minutes it got to 20%, with 30 minutes it got to 44%, and the full charge finished in 86 minutes. So it's not that fast a charge, but I think for the price it's okay. Evidently, at the software level, we will find a standard saving mode and ultra saving mode, and to take care of the battery, the only thing we find is a charge separation function. To activate this option, you must have the charger plugged into the current because the energy will travel directly to the device without passing through the battery. This way you avoid heating, and obviously you will avoid the battery being drained while you are playing, so it can be an interesting option that we had already seen available on Red Magic devices, and it is nice to see it here, but it does not have charging. It's nice to see it here, but it doesn't have smart charging or charging lock at a certain percentage, so it doesn't have so many options to take care of the battery. In connectivity, we will find support for 5G networks, which is pretty good considering we are talking about a low-cost device. Generally at this price, many sacrifice the 5G connectivity, but this one keeps it, although you do not have some option to block mobile data to certain applications. And the Wi-Fi download speed will be a bit short. In this case, it supports Wi-Fi 5, and just in the recording of this video, my internet speed is a little bit limited, so the result is quite poor, but it is not such a slow speed that this device is able to reach. I have tested other Nubia that do have some difficulties to reach a high download speed, but this one has not presented so many difficulties in that aspect. The Bluetooth connectivity will be in version 5.2 and does not have NFC. What it does have is FM radio, and curiously it works without the need to connect headphones. That is something quite strange in the smartphone market. It is also capable of projecting your screen wirelessly, although in mirror format only, so it doesn't have more advanced projection functions, but it does have the ability to do so to other devices, in addition to the Chromecast. It also integrates Android Auto and fortunately does not make sacrifices in sensors, as several sensors could be exploited in some games. Then yes, the accelerometer is present, the geomagnetic field sensor, the orientation sensor, it also has gyroscope, light sensor, proximity sensor, completely physical, and also the gravity sensor and linear acceleration in addition to the rotation vector. Then it has everything. In terms of ecosystem, Nubia falls short, as even though it can manage to offer a few devices, they don't really offer advanced interaction between them. In this sense, it depends entirely on Google, so you can use the quick share technology to send and receive files with other Android devices, or you can buy headsets that have Google Fast Pair to link them with ease, but even in the cloud storage and control of home devices is entirely dependent on what Google can come up with, and therefore it is completely dependent on what Google can offer, and therefore it is Google can offer and is therefore very limited in this regard. Let's go now to do the performance test by opening various apps. This device has a processor that I had not tested to date, is the Unisoc T820. I know that many people get scared when they hear that it has a Unisoc processor, but you have to remember that there are several models that Unisoc handles. So this is the most powerful model that Unisoc currently has in its catalog, which obviously is still a simple processor, but within all its simple processors, this one is the most powerful. So let's give it a try and see how long it takes in total. It took 3.5 seconds to open each application, which pretty much for this price range is pretty good. If you consider the lowest price of the ones I shared with you, it's definitely a lot of power. If you consider the highest price, which is Telcel, it could be that it is still not as powerful as we would like, but still adequate for the price range. I think the highlight of what I'm noticing right now is that it keeps pretty much all of these apps open. Remember, it has 8 GB of RAM, and in this case, they seem to be perfectly well optimized. So even having these 16 apps open, the device has not lost any performance in terms of restarting apps. Maybe it takes a little while to react when you go back to them and the navigation within the apps is not that smooth, but definitely that allowing you to keep all of these apps open at the same time is a great advantage that in this price range very few devices will be able to boast. So the performance, I think it could become something outstanding. It also has 256 GB of storage, which is very good, even though it doesn't have a micro SD card slot. But with 256 GB, I think you do have a lot of space that will be a little difficult to fill. And by the way, in addition to the 8 gigabytes of physical RAM, it has another 12 gigabytes of virtual RAM that I consider unnecessary. With 8 physical gigabytes, it is more than enough, but by default it comes on with up to 12 additional gigabytes. So now let's do the test of exporting a video with total duration of 1 minute will be in full HD using clips recorded with this device to test how fast it can do it. And already it took 23 seconds, which for the price range confirms us that we are in front of a considerably powerful processor. Now let's talk about gaming, which is the main point of this device. Then note that to enter the game manager you have to access through the quick settings. It is something that seems very strange to me because it does not have any special icon to access this application. So the access is a bit strange, but once you are inside you are going to find several settings. For starters, note that in this section you can view all the games you have installed on your device, and something interesting is that you can access a specific setting where you can determine an accidental touch rejection right in the area where your hand rests, and you can tell it whether you want it to be a wide or short rejection depending on the size and type of hand you have. You can also select different performance modes. In this case we did all the tests with Rise mode. You could also configure some voice style, but always with headphones connected. And obviously you can also configure the recording that the replays will have, and finally you can assign some specific layout of the mapped buttons. Then we are going to open one of the games so that you can see how it is inside. Since the moment you run it, you see that the game space is running, several optimizations are opened, you can have a specific monitor in this section. In fact, it is very curious that it is practically the same interface that shows a Red Magic, which are much more expensive devices focused on gaming. So the fact of showing you this whole suite of gaming-focused options in a much cheaper device makes it very attractive. In this part, you can see the CPU and GPU consumption. We will also be able to have some quick settings to manipulate the brightness, refresh rate, and other things. And something curious is that it also has a button to activate instant replay. In fact, it's called Red Magic Time. Although this is going to consume you more power and obviously it's going to reduce performance, but you could be recording the screen in pre-replay format, but it is not going to be a gameplay that is going to record the whole game. That is, if you made a move that you liked, you press this button and it will automatically give you a video of seconds before and seconds after the moment, so you can have a good memory of that master move. Of course, you could also record the entire screen, and it also has a button to prevent the device from rotating. We will also find a button to optimize in one touch the entire device and free up memory. And you can also avoid unwanted touches, enable the charge separation mode that I told you about in the battery section. And you can also enable here some specific reminders or timers. And you could also turn off the screen while it's downloading content so you don't have as much power consumption. And it actually has other buttons here as well, so you could block incoming calls so that you're not being interrupted. Another button to change the style of the notification so that it's not getting in your way too much. And notice that it also has a selector for how you want the notifications to look. So the first option is the traditional one, which can get in the way a lot while you're playing, but this device also brings a second option for notification style. And notice how it's a sliding strip, which is much less in the way. And I think that can be convenient because you reach to read the content. And there is a third type of notification which is much more useful, and just at the top you have to pay close attention to a little wave that is generated, but it doesn't tell you which application is sending you the notification or anything else. That's why I say it's much more useful. And finally, you could also disable any notification to avoid interruptions. And finally, on the left side, there is also a full suite of options. The first button is going to take you back to the game manager. But then we find a button to open the control panel, which we already saw also from a moment ago, where you can configure some other parameters. There is also a third button that enables the add-ons. In this part, we are going to find a lot of tools to improve your gaming experience. For example, you can connect an external accessory such as a Red Magic specific gamepad. You would also find this option to enable an auxiliary line. You can select any of the presets, and as you notice, some dotted lines appear on the screen. This is ideal for games where you need to mark a very specific area. Generally, sandbox games could take advantage of this option. There is also the timer that will appear at the top of the screen, and it is also much more focused on sandbox games, where you must be aware of how long you have been using certain powers and something similar. There is also the option to enable a special sight, very useful in shooting games. You can select the color of this sight and also the style so that it is always present. You can also change its size and transparency, so it can be very useful in that kind of content. You also have a macro option that with a single touch you can enable different touches on your screen, so you gain a lot of versatility in certain games that require a combination of movements. It also includes another option that is quite useful when the buttons do not fit the position of your hands. Notice that we could reposition the buttons. Then you simply activate one of these buttons, place the lowercase on the button you want to replace and place the uppercase where you want to play. You can enable 4 new buttons and watch, although note that at the moment it doesn't seem to be working right. You should enable this option. We've tried it on other phones, but on this one specifically it doesn't seem to react quite right, so they should fix it with an update. But to finish with the add-ons, we will also find a graphic equalizer of the audio. I don't think you're going to use it much, but it's there. And finally, the star feature of this device is in this section. Just say activate and that's it. Here you will be able to configure with the letter L and R the triggers that are at the top. As you can see, it immediately shows a response to make you see which button is the one you are activating. Then we could place it wherever we want. In fact, you can customize if you want it to work as a single tap or as a touch and hold or some others. In fact, it has different modes for you as a user to choose the one you like the most. And note that in this case they do work, unlike the button remapping that we saw that didn't work. So in this case I can fire directly with this trigger. In this case I put the reload action with the other trigger. But you can place the action on the button you want to appear on your screen. Undoubtedly this gives you a very good competitive advantage because you have much more viewing space and you don't have to have your hands on the buttons. And finally, there is another option that will allow you to have a still image on the screen, maybe to have a shortcut or a tutorial. You can add it directly from your gallery and then just press the hang button and it will appear as a picture-in-picture mode so that you can have in mind maybe some scenery or some destination you want to reach. Or a destination you want to reach. Or for memory games by taking a screenshot. Cheating? In Call of Duty, this device gives us the low graphic quality at a medium frame rate. However, it does allow us to go up to medium graphics quality at a high rate. But evidently it is a processor that does not show too much graphic compatibility. So there will be very few special effects that you can enable and very few experimental functions. So we immediately realized that this is a device that will not have very advanced special effects, but the experience playing with this graphics quality is going to be very good. It showed almost perfect stability. Although the heating did get to be a little high considering that we are in the first test and reached 43.9 degrees Celsius. Obviously the fact of having all these additions at software level greatly complement the gamer experience. But it is not the device that offers supreme power as we could find in the Red Magic. But seeing practically the same software as the Red Magic here definitely gives you a very good experience. The triggers respond quite smoothly and fast. Obviously not at the level of a Red Magic, but they do give you a very good experience. So if you don't mind playing with graphic qualities that aren't that high, it's definitely going to be a very good experience. In the Legends game, we changed the automatic setting to a manual setting with low graphic detail at 60 frames per second, and again the experience was quite good. In this case, it averaged 60 frames per second with a lot of stability. The lowest peak was just 53 frames per second, so it's definitely very good. In this game, it would be more convenient to turn on manual shooting to get the full trigger experience, but there it's completely up to the user. Overall, the performance was very good. Even recording the screen kept the 60 frames per second with a good level of stability and the temperature didn't get too high. It's funny because I thought it was gonna raise the temperature more in this game than in the previous one, but in this case it didn't happen as expected. In the case of SpongeBob by default, it has the low resolution and medium quality. In this case, we lowered the quality and kept 60 frames per second and wanted to keep the smoothing on to see how it did. And in this case, again, it was a pretty good experience, very close to 60 frames per second on average, very good stability, although the warm-up did get to be a little bit higher than we would like. Obviously, it will have the occasional stumble, but overall it does give a pretty stable experience. It is a performance that is good as long as you select low graphics quality. You don't want to demand the same from this processor that you would demand from a much more advanced processor because it's a simple processor, but in low graphic qualities it can give you a very good performance, and obviously in very prolonged games the heating could wreak havoc. Finally, we played Henshin Impact, and in this case by default it has a very low graphic quality setting, but for the test we raised it to low. Some things we turned it up to medium and turned it up to 60 frames per second, and in this case it's obviously not able to maintain such a positive experience. Possibly if it was appropriate to leave it on the very low graphics quality and the lowest possible settings, because in this case it did have a little bit more trouble maintaining a good level of stability. Although its average frames per second is still something quite redeemable considering its price, especially referring to the lowest price. Remember that at the higher Telcel price I was telling you about, it is not as recommendable, although it is still a competitive device. However, the heating is something very important. In this case it was close to 50 degrees Celsius. If you like to play for very long sessions in a hot environment, I think the device is going to suffer quite a bit, unless you choose the most basic graphics quality possible. But I insist that one of the main attractions is to see all the Red Magic software available at this price, as it gives you the triggers, all the additional add-ons, the tool to record replays and other things. So, definitely that is very nice, but yes, it can get hotter than we would like. And for the moment, this has been all for this video. In conclusion, it is clear that it is a smartphone focused and aimed at gamers. At the price that Telcel distributes it, it does not seem to me an option that gives you an exaggerated performance, especially considering that at that price you could find a Poco brand device which usually have more powerful processors. But in the price range of Mercado Libre and Amazon, it definitely becomes one of the most powerful options for gaming. As I already told you several times, the most interesting and highlight will be its triggers in conjunction with all the software tools added to the games. For now, we have reached the end of this video. If you liked it, you know you can tell us about it, and we'll see you next time.